to Sandy and Nora's podcast.
Hey, Nora.
Hey, Sandy.
What a week.
Yeah.
What a couple of
oh my
weeks.
God. Couple of weeks.
I continue to just like be fully heartbroken and just like stunned at the level of cruelty that runs this entire country, the West. Like it's just so unfathomable to me, so bananas to me that we can be living in a situation where a clear genocide is taking place and people are equivocating about it and in ways that like obviously make no sense. And, you know, it's impacting everyday conversations. Like, the fog of war stuff is also really confusing. And, and it just, like the common sense that we should use in those moments feels like it's really, really tainted by really heavy propaganda campaigns. And I just I feel very, very scared about what is about to be lost.
Yeah, it is definitely the first time in my adult life. I remember living through this around the shock and awe campaign in Iraq and around the invasion in Afghanistan after 9/11. But I remain very surprised at how easy it has been for the political establishment in Canada, and I mean, we can talk about any Western country, but let's stick to Canada, to so uniformly change the truth of what is so plainly obvious. You know, I mean, you can use the bombing of the Al-Adha hospital as the example, but it's like, it's so far beyond that, where it's like, you know, occupation is freedom and bombing is self-defense. And this is a just crusade on the behalf of Israel, even though the language being used by the leadership is so racist and so fascist and so disgusting. And still you have Justin Trudeau affirming, and Francois Legault and Scott Moe and the entire Legislative Assembly of Nova Scotia, affirming Israel's right to do this, couched in the language of self-defense. It feels really disorienting. And I suspect that people listening to this episode are feeling similarly disoriented.
Yeah, disoriented and dystopian. I think you are the only journalist that I've seen consistently making sense of the scale of the attack. And continuing to push, like, you need to understand this attack in context of a city that you were familiar with, and I've heard you bring up Montreal several times as kind of like an analogy to the space we're talking about. You need to understand this barrage, this siege, this attack on civilians in the context of how much weaponry, how many bombs they're using compared to the amount of bombs that were used in other conflicts that lasted years. You're the only one in Canada that I've seen do this. And that to me is like, how can you be the only one?
I don't know.
How is that possible? How is that happening?
It seems like the most obvious way to talk about this, because if we get into the emotions and the death, and it's so hard to see clearly because it's so sad. I mean, that's all very normal ways to deal with war, and everybody should have those kinds of reactions. But for me, when I hear things like, well, Israel has a right to defend itself, and it's like, sorry, the IDF, them, not Hamas, not Doctors Without Borders, not Germany, not the United States. The IDF has said that they dropped 6,000 bombs in 6 days on Gaza. And knowing that the heaviest bombardment was actually this past weekend, that has probably risen to something like 8,000 bombs, right? And that is more, 6,000 is more than NATO dropped on Libya for the entire engagement. And like on top of the fact that the majority of people who live in Gaza are children, on top of the fact that the majority of people in Gaza, or most of the people, all the people in Gaza can't leave, that there's 2.2 million people. It's the most densely populated, one of the most densely populated places on the planet. And Israel has total control over their movements and is bombing them more than the United States dropped bombs on Afghanistan in a whole year. If we don't put it into these terms, then those emotional kinds of responses that we're hearing all the time from our politicians are allowed to make more sense. But when we use the facts and we're like, wait, then someone like Brian Lilly, a Toronto Sun columnist who's been trying to get some number of students from Toronto Metropolitan University that have just signed a letter, law students, to never have them hired at any law firm in Canada. All of a sudden, that becomes very clear that this is a man that's literally supporting this level of violence and horrific munitions being dropped on such a small part of the world. And then it makes sense. And it's so easy for us to get our heads turned around and for things to make no sense because it's so horrible.
It is. And, just a final thing to maybe say before we get into, our regular thank yous and then into the discussion tonight. Like I cannot stress enough how important it is that right now you try to find a varied amount of news sources and be really critical about what you are reading. I was listening to a news report at some point this week that claimed that the Palestinians control the Rafah crossing.
Right.
And
yeah.
it was them who was not opening it up. And this is I can't remember exactly which publication it was, but it was a reputable publication. And I was like, how just, when you are reading Western news, just be really critical and thoughtful and remember a few things. Right now in Gaza, the electricity has been shut off. And that means access to getting information out is very limited. And on the other side of this war, Israel has not only the opportunity to make sure that their message gets out in whatever channel that they want. They also have allies in some of the most powerful governments around the world. And we do know that the U.S. government lies, and we know that the Israeli government lies. That is affirmed and has happened multiple times over our past. And so you have to think about whatever information that you're receiving in that light. Even when you're hearing information about something like death tolls, understand that for people who are trying to report out of Gaza, like even getting accurate numbers is really difficult right now. And so, read as much as you can, but just, when you're going into something, be really, really critical about the information that you're reading, especially if it's coming from sources like in Canada, unless maybe it's Nora. I don't know.
Well, this is where I am reading as much as I can from the Middle East. I'm reading a lot of Al Jazeera, which is a channel that is very trustworthy and that has ethics related to journalism. I also read.
And has been banned. It has. I believe that Israel has banned Al Jazeera.
Yeah, and they're trying to make it impossible for Al Jazeera to report. And they're really, there are other international news agencies that have presence in Gaza, but Al Jazeera is really one of the big ones. I do try to read the Times of Israel to see what the narrative inside of Israel is. It's very interesting, and I think that's more of a right-wing newspaper. So you can read that knowing that. But you're right about the Canadian perspective on all of this. It's so thin. It's so hollow. I mean, there were millions of people around the world who marched this past weekend. And last night when I was preparing for the Daily News on Monday morning, I didn't see a single article about a single event in Canada. And I went through CBC's website, I went through CTV's website, and I went through Global's website. I think that what's happening in the press right now is that they know that they can't cover this with the normal bias that gives Israel the benefit of the doubt because it is so bad. And so it's just easier to not cover it. It's just easier to pull back entirely and to not really cover it. And instead what you have are these articles like how to explain the Hamas-Israel war to children, which is an article that I've seen on all platforms. And it's like, who the fuck needs help with that? Like, you're an adult, figure it out. Like, okay. But that's not reporting.
God.
What we actually need is reporting. And Sandy, I don't know if you saw on Saturday night, but the Canadian government officially said that they believe Israel's line over bombing the Al-Hada hospital, which is just, I think, so
did see that. I did see that. Yeah.
So we will get into all of this a little bit more. But before, let's do some housekeeping. Sandy, we're heading to Winnipeg.
We are heading to Winnipeg, and I'm so excited. You know what's interesting, Nora, is I last week the documentary that I've been working on, Black Life, was released, and I did CBC syndication. Have you done that before? Where you're like on every, like, a whole bunch of radio stations from coast to coast for hours.
Sandy, I did CBC syndication on May 1st for May Day, and every single station had me on.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. Okay, so
amazing, but it sucks.
Yeah, it totally sucks, especially if you live on the West Coast, because the day starts at 3 a.m. The day starts at 3 a.m. and you go until 6 a.m. To go across the country. But in any case, when I got to Winnipeg, the producer who was setting me up before I went on the show was like, I love your podcast with Nora. I'm a big fan. And, I hope you guys come to Winnipeg at some point. And I was like, we are literally coming to Winnipeg at the end of November. So that was a really fun conversation. But at least, there's going to be one excited person there.
Hey, I know there's going to be more than one. So you can get your tickets at thepointofsale.com. It's the same place that we were selling the Toronto tickets. I think it's probably the only event in Winnipeg, so just look up Winnipeg. Tickets are $35 for general admission. We're getting better at learning these platforms. And so unlike the Toronto show, sorry folks in Toronto, learning as we're going along, there are 3 levels of ticket prices. So there is a youth price for people under the age of 18, and there's an unwaged price. So you just have to go to the point of sale, pick the ticket that fits best for you. November 24th, it's a Friday night at the West End Cultural Center. I hear that there's 400 seats there. So that's how many tickets are going to be on sale. And we are so excited to bring with us again, John Camille Farah, to do some music.
So exciting. And yes, that's right. It is John Camille Farah. A few people have asked us to say his name on the podcast again. But you know what is even better is that his name is always on our website, because John Camille Farah did the opening and closing songs to theme song to this podcast. So you can always find information about who he is, if you Google him, but on our website, if you forget his name and you need it, it's on our website.
That's right. And is it time for some gratitude?
Time for some gratitude. Let's get into some of that before all of the sad stuff that we need to return to.
Okay, yes. Well, thank you so much to everybody that's donated to the podcast in the last couple of weeks. We super appreciate it. Of course, we didn't get to do shout outs last week because we are in Toronto, and I hope that you folks enjoyed the live show, the recording of the live show. It's always fun to listen to the live dynamism with a room and an audience and some applause and laughter. And you know what? We never say this, but I'm going to say it. If you've never donated to us, or you haven't donated to it in a couple of years, go to patreon.com, Sandy and Nora, /Sandy and Nora. That's our Patreon. You can donate any amount of money that you'd like. It all helps us out. It helps us do these live shows. It pays Sandy and I a little bit of money, which is great. Doesn't pay us very, very much. In case you're wondering, we can always get more. But that's really wonderful. And it is through the Patreon at Sandy and Nora that you are able to do this. So thank you so much for everybody that has donated for the first time or changed their donation in the last 2 weeks, because we have been off. Especially to SP, Daniel, Denise, Fraser, E, Zaid, Julia, Christy, Ian, Sylvain, and Dawn. Thank you so much for your support.
Thank you so much. Okay, Nora, what's going on this week?
Yeah, so the biggest news in the world is Israel's horrific attack, historic attack in many ways on Palestine, on Gaza. Of course, they've also been raiding the West Bank as well. And so while casualties in the West Bank are not what they are in Gaza, they are climbing. I believe the latest death toll has deaths at over 5,000 people. And those numbers are going to be impacted by the fact that there's no electricity, that rescue capacities are majorly diminished, that people are dying in hospital for, injuries and stuff they sustain from these bombings. And so that's all we know is 5,000 people at some level, at least 2,000 children have been killed. And there's a political consensus that has emerged in Canada, from the beginning of this, that this is still within Israel's right to do. That Israel is simply protecting itself from Gaza, or Israel's avenging itself in light of the Hamas attacks that happened 2 weeks ago. And, sure, almost 1 million people were killed in Iraq after the justifications were made that there was connections to 9/11. Hundreds of thousands of people died in Afghanistan for the same reason. And so here we are years later, and it seems like the same scripts are running again, right to the point where in the United States, I saw that someone has said this is the new axis of evil. It's Russia, China, and Iran, as if none of us remember 2001. So in Canada, what that has meant is a unanimous support for Israel, right from, of course, all of our politicians that have any power down through columnists like Andrew Coyne, who has been consistently supporting Israel. Robin Urbach, who turned this into, well, if there was a Holocaust killing Jews, I'd know that who would actually have my back, which was like, what the hell are you talking about, Robin Urbach? I know whose back you won't have when massive crises are happening. And so in this environment in Canada, that has left very, very little space to credibly speak out. And it's all been marginalized into the streets, into these massive rallies that we're seeing in cities and towns all over Canada.
That are then not, as you said, just not being reported on. It feels like so ridiculous. And, some of the other things that have been happening, I just can't, it is more palatable to be against this war, it seems, in Israel than in Canada right now. As people within even the Knesset have been critical in a way that people here are not. It feels as though people are not allowed to be here, or at least it's not happening in the same way. Today, the government in the U.S. has said that this is not the time for a ceasefire, and my God, hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced. Hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced. People are going to be forever changed by this, people and their families, forever changed by this. I can't understand how you look at the verifiable reports as to what's happening, and just respond as many people in Canadian society have been responding. And so today, I think what we're going to talk about is some of that stuff. What you might be feeling, maybe even perhaps there's a corollary in your own life, and what some of the options are of how you can respond. What should be happening? What can we do in these moments?
Yeah, so let's take a survey of the landscape right now. There are very, very few people, high-profile people in Canada who've spoken out in support of Palestine. In fact, I'm actually thinking you can count on two hands the number of people. Very few people from the business world at all. I think I've seen one, the owner of Paramount Fine Foods, I saw saying something. But other than that, it's been pretty much uniformly in favor of the narrative that the government is pushing. And people who have spoken out, there have been some job losses. There have been job losses already. There is a pilot for Air Canada, Mustafa Etso, who was fired for being at a rally that was pro-Palestinian. Dr. Ben Thompson, who's a doctor at the Mackenzie Richmond Hill Hospital, he was fired for supporting Palestine, which, in case anyone is wondering about the doctor shortage in this country, it is not so severe in the minds of management and government that they can't get rid of doctors with whom they disagree. Then there are folks who are ostensibly on the left, people in labor and people within the NDP. And the most recent major attacks have been two that I've seen pretty closely. One is Fred Hahn, who's the president of CUPE Ontario. Fred, a lot of people thought that he was going to have to resign as president of CUPE Ontario because of the backlash for him to have the audacity to support Palestinian human rights, which is something he has supported for many years. And the CUPE National Convention is on right now. And so that's a huge theme at the convention is Fred himself and what should be done. And there's attempts to try to impeach him and all this. And then there's Sarah Jama, who is the newest member of provincial parliament in Ontario. She's, I think, the youngest, if not one of the youngest or the youngest member of provincial parliament, certainly the youngest in the caucus in the NDP. And Sarah put out a pretty reasoned statement a couple of weeks ago, 3 or 2 days after the Hamas attack, and said that, that Palestine is under occupation from Israel, and that's part of the context and blah, blah, blah. And she was forced to apologize, and Doug Ford served a motion against her to censure her. And today, we're recording this on Monday, Sarah was censured. So she's not allowed to speak in the Legislative Assembly, and she's not allowed to be on committees. And the NDP kicked her out of caucus and said that they did so because she did things that they hadn't agreed to. She surprised them, was the exact language. And that she's made things unsafe for the staff that work in the Ontario NDP's office, which is like pretty bullshit considering like the threats that she's getting as a result of the attacks from the Ontario NDP and from Doug Ford are like a million times worse than anyone is experiencing in the ONDP office, for sure. But it just shows the extent that Zionist sentiment, that Zionism has, or the pull that it has over our political establishment. And it's so funny because it's like, it goes unnoticed if you're not paying attention to this world. If you are paying attention to this world, you see it all the time. But if this is the first time that you're really realizing to the extent that we are wrapped up with the Zionist project in a completely different country, it can probably feel pretty jarring. And it's for me, like, it is stunning how cowardly people are. I mean, there have been more than 20 journalists killed in Gaza. Something like 23 is the number right now from the Committee to Protect Journalists. I haven't seen a single
unfucking believable.
I haven't seen a single journalism group in this country, whether union or federation or association, condemn that, other than my own union, the Canadian Freelance Union. It's like, even that we can't do because what? You're afraid of what? Who? What? You're afraid of what? Exactly. You're afraid of being made a pariah, of losing everything? I mean, certainly that's the threat that we're seeing playing out with Sarah Jama, which is horrible. And so if that's the threat, then of course the question is, well, then what is the defense or what is the reaction? And how do we start pushing against this so that no longer becomes threatening?
Yeah, I'm also seeing this situation that's happening at York University where all of the students' unions had put out a statement after October 7th, and the university has responded to say that they will no longer recognize them if they don't retract that statement, I believe, by I think this week. And also in the provincial legislature, they have like named the students who are a part of the executive that have put out this statement. And there is a lot of reprisal in this country that is allowed for a country in which, apparently we're supposed to have freedom of speech. And it's bizarre too that, for so long, we have, those of us on the left have been responding to campaigns about free speech from people on the right that weren't really about free speech. And now all the free speech issues are happening like right now, really clearly in front of our faces. And there's not much that's being said about it. And it seems like folks are not concerned about it. And that is also a very bizarre, disorienting thing to be experiencing. And so, I think one thing that that I'll, reiterate that I said at our live show is that, when you do take these steps, these moments, when you take these efforts at expressing solidarity, there will be consequences. There are going to be consequences, especially from folks for whom it benefits them for this conflict to be supported, either politically or financially or whatever, what have you. There will be consequences. And so for folks who are paying attention to this and are nervous and feeling like they can't speak out, one of the things to ask yourself about is like, what are you nervous about, and what risks can you sustain? What risks are you willing to sustain in the face of a genocide? And doing as much as you can to organize the people around you to support you in whatever solidarity efforts you are engaging in, to minimize as much risk as possible. But we should expect that, much like the 9/11 era, it's very similar to today, that, back then, if you were saying things that seemed like it was against being like patriotic or some bullshit or supporting the United States, people were, you could find yourself in a lot of like heated arguments or people calling you things that didn't make any sense. In an internet world, some of those risks can seem heightened, and there will be risks. There will be responses to what you say. If those responses are coming from your opponents, perhaps those responses are worth it. Perhaps that's something that you can sustain. Perhaps that's something that you should expect. Perhaps that's something that you should prepare for. I don't think we should expect that solidarity is something that you just say and it's easy and you just move on with your day because you've kind of shown other people that you're a good person. It is going to be more difficult than that. And these are some difficult questions that folks should ask themselves. The other thing that I would say is to think about like some of those demands that are coming from people who are responding to some of these actions that folks are taking. So, retracting a statement, making an apology. The retractions and the apologies, they don't do anything. They never, ever do anything. Like, really, really critically think about what it is going to be doing. You're appeasing someone, perhaps who's got a position of power, or a body of people who have a position of power who are asking you, telling you, trying to make you move in a place that they know you don't believe. You know you don't believe. And anybody watching knows that you don't believe. So what is the point in doing it? It never does anything except for to put the person who is in power, to give them more power, to make sure that they know that they are in the powerful position. Just eat it.
Like you said it.
Eat it.
Own it. Be proud of the statements that you make. Like this is political strategy 101. And this is actually what makes me most despair about the state of the Ontario NDP, because it's like, obviously the people leading this party, like they have no idea how to be politically strategic, clearly. Because if you're apologizing for a political position that you know is popular, and let's say it's popular enough to get someone elected in Hamilton Centre, then you are alienating your support, and your opponents who are forcing you to apologize will never support you. It is a zero-sum game that I cannot believe anybody working full-time in politics thinks it's a good idea. There's no good that comes out of it. And we can see that clear as day in this situation. And so if you are finding yourself in this situation and you have some piece of shit hanging over your head saying, hey, you got to apologize for these comments that are fair, that are reasoned, that are true, that yes, Israel is an apartheid state, and yes, what they're doing is unacceptable, and yes, the international community needs to stand up to Israel and stop its complete obliteration or attempts at obliteration of Palestine, Like, then know what is happening here, that you got someone who is spineless with zero strategic sense at all, zero political strategic sense at all, that they're probably not qualified for the job that they're holding. And that will make it worse. That will make it worse. And it feeds the opponents more content. So let's look at, Joel Harden. So Joel Harden is a member of provincial parliament in Ontario as well. I have not seen Joel say very much in this stuff, which I am very surprised by. And honestly, so disappointed by it. I don't actually care what the justification for being silent is right now. There is no justification. I don't care. It's unacceptable. Anybody in that caucus that's progressive needs to say something. But he was accused of being anti-Semitic because he said that he had asked his Jewish friends to weigh in or have an opinion on Israel. And that is, was explained to be an anti-Semitic trope to say that Jews, you expect Jews to have an opinion on Israel. Now, when it comes to this, of course, when everything's flipped around, then of course, the attack on Israel is attack on all Jews in Canada, which is what we've heard many, many times from many people. But it doesn't work when it's Joel Harden doing it. And so he says this, which is also a ridiculous thing to say. I mean, don't say that. But he then apologizes for saying it after pressure to apologize. And what's the result? Now, his opponents are like, he's admitted to being anti-Semitic because here's his apology. And the apology gets waved around. And it's like, why did you do that to yourself? You don't need to give your opponents more ammo against you. You do not. They've got a lot because they hate you, because they hate what you stand for. And so that's another piece in this is we have to be very strategic. And strategic means not staying silent necessarily, but finding ways that we can speak out that are the most effective possible. And I think, Sandy, I would love to hear what you think about this too, but I feel like people have not actually had to perform solidarity in a long time because the left is in such tatters that the second that solidarity comes with a bit of a price, there are so many people that are like, whoa, this is too hot for me. I'm going to just get out of the kitchen for a little bit.
Yeah. And gosh, you know that I have had, you and I both have had, not to, indict you on this too, have had critiques about some of the ways that the sort of the idea of self-care rhetoric or the individualized way that we think about taking care of one another has really been demobilizing. And I think that the acceptable language around, what folks are able to do and are not able to do vis-a-vis our feelings, our individual feelings, is a part of this because it's an accepted justification on the left for not doing things. And there was a time when that was fully unacceptable, and I think I like that time better, to be honest. I mean, there's an importance in having a discussion about accessibility, sure, in that. But not, I do think critically we should be looking at the ways that some of the cultures that we have embedded on the left have been demobilizing and how they are used in moments like these to stop people from understanding that, yes, solidarity isn't charity. It's not a gift. It's not you reaching into your pocket and giving someone some money and remaining unchanged. That's not what it is. It doesn't work that way. And so thinking about, student unions right now and thinking about, our own time at students' unions, I just hope that folks aren't seriously considering, kowtowing to what York University and the fucking government are saying. By writing those letters, you should have been aware that this was something that could happen. And if you weren't, you know now. So here we are. And
that was a
you
fast
should
education.
be ready. Very fast education. You should be ready to take those people to court. That is what you should be doing on your end as a free speech thing. At the same time, you should have the next steps in your solidarity campaign figured out, because quite frankly, this isn't about you. It's not about you. You need to fight that fight and continue to use the power that you do have, the space that you have garnered, like in the news, the little spaces you've been able to carve out to continue to make the demands that need to be made. And you should be organizing with student organizations around the fucking world on this, around the fucking world. Anywhere that there are students' unions, with the exception of maybe the United States for some reason, anywhere else that there are students' unions, students are going to be active on this issue and are looking for international solidarity partners and ways to support one another. And now is where the work begins. Once you put out the statement, we talked previously about how the statement can't be the only thing. Now is when the work begins. Like, you need to keep going, to keep pushing, to keep fighting. Politically, if some of the stuff that's happening and is not happening, I'm seeing that, there's a bunch of MPs who have signed a letter asking for Justin Trudeau to call for a ceasefire, and now Jagmeet Singh is asking for a meeting to call for a ceasefire. It's like, okay, these are things that can happen. Sure. It's taking what those things are really doing is telling us where those people stand in this conflict, in this fight, who they are. It would be great to see more organizing. Can you set up some coalitions with other lawmakers elsewhere in the world, and what can you do with that sort of power? And if you're experiencing some frustrations within your party, maybe it's time to do something new. Maybe this is a moment to make sure that those of us who are anti-war in the country have some, like, a party, someplace in the some political space to vote for, to fucking to support something. But like all of these moments, this solidarity, like, gosh, like that would be a hard thing to do, to build a new political body that is going to have international influence and is going to call for the right things in this time period. That will, if anyone is going to try to do that, that will require sacrifice, and it will be the right thing to do. Both of those things are true.
But also, let's talk about this moment. I have very little faith in Israel to just stop on its own. I have very little faith in the West to stop Israel. I do have faith in these millions of people who are protesting around the world for Palestine to be free. And that gives me a lot of hope. But I also have a lot of hope that this moment is actually paradigm shifting.
Yes. Yes.
This is a paradigm shifting moment. And the far right, Christ, Trudeau is part of an alliance that includes a literal fascist from Italy that's going to intervene somehow and support Israel to do what it's doing. They know very well that the winds on this question have shifted, that there are far more people that see the occupation for what it is than for what the PR machine of the Israeli government wants us to see it to be. And I think that gives us a lot of power. And in any paradigm shift moment, it means that we have to seize the moment. How many people felt that something big was going to happen during COVID, and no one seized the moment? There was no union that led a huge charge.
No one. Nothing. Everybody waited. And so here we have a new moment. We have people we can rally around and need to rally around, like Sarah Jama, like Fred Hahn, like people who've lost their jobs for the statements that they've taken. And this is actually an organizing opportunity to push that paradigm shift. Because if we are going into the streets and saying free Palestine because we want Palestine to be free, that is a political demand for which our government will not do unless they have a gun to their head. And so how do we
metaphorically do that to our government. We build movements and we build solidarity and we take risks. And through doing these things, they snowball into new kinds of political culture. And so it can start as simple as statements of support for Sarah or for Fred, or condemnations of the government. It can start with your union being the one to pay for the generators at the rally so that there's a solid sound system at the next rally. It can be as simple as making sure you have a delegation out and people can meet each other around that delegation at the next action, or organizing a speaking event, or going to a speaking event, or building around a Palestinian resistance within your own communities, and hearing what they want the international community to do or to say or to know about what's going on in Gaza. Because it's the other thing is that we don't have solid information on what is happening in Gaza. And so Palestinians in Canada with connections to Gaza are so critical to be letting us know what is happening based on what they're hearing from their family, to help us round out what we're not hearing in the press. And so during any massive paradigm shifting moment, the forces of evil will be pushing further and further and further to the right, towards destruction and towards death. And we have to be doing every single thing that we can to be pushing in the opposite direction for the forces of ending this occupation, and doing everything possible to try and get Canada, at least our little part of the world, to put pressure on Israel to stop what they're doing. And we cannot just wait for the bodies to pile up and say, maybe at 10,000 dead, maybe at 10,000 dead, the Canadian Labour Congress is going to make a statement. Maybe at 50,000 dead, QP National is going to make a statement. Maybe at 100,000 dead, Doug Ford will no longer pass motions in favor of Israel supporting its right to self-defense. That's not good enough. We can't wait. There's no time to wait at all. The urgency is now.